Alright folks, how's it going? Welcome to the next instalment of Doctor Zhivago by Pasternak. Today we're looking at chapter 3, and this will be going out as usual on my Substack, so if you'd like to read the essay, it's over at camscampbellreads.substack.com. And this is going out as a podcast episode as well. So if you search your podcast app of choice for Doctor Zhivago Cams Campbell, I guess, you should find it that way. But the links are also provided on the Substack post, and I'll put them also in the YouTube video as well. So yes, it's going out as a YouTube video. And for those watching it as it's published, you're a week behind. So if you want to see the videos as they come out, you can do that over on Substack. And I do that as a perk for my Substack readers. So they get the video 1 week in advance. But the podcast comes out on the day of publication, as does the essay. And you can watch the video on the Substack post as an embedded link. So that's the housekeeping out the way. We're going to take a look at chapter 3, as I've said, and I'm going to read the essay out for you. And I hope you enjoy. So, here we go. The wardrobe escapade. Quote, one winter. So we're starting in 1911. So we've jumped forward quite a bit from 1905, where we finished chapter 2. Yury resides with the Gromekos, Alexander and Anna, and their daughter, Tonya. Alexander buys Anna an ebony wardrobe. Markel, the handyman, puts it together, having brought his 6-year-old daughter, Marinka, diminutive of Marina. Keep Marina in mind, as I have a feeling we'll be seeing her much later. The wardrobe collapses before it's fully assembled when Anna leans against a panel. She comes away with bruises and, thereafter, does not like the wardrobe much at all. Quote, after this accident, Anna developed a pulmonary weakness. It sounds a bit like what my wife refers to as a Homer present from the episode of The Simpsons where Homer buys Marge a bowling ball with the name Homer engraved on it. And there's a link here to the clip on the essay. Anna's lungs are inflamed, though I don't see a connection between the lungs and an ebony wardrobe, unless she's been sanding it without wearing a mask. The kids are around 20 years old and will graduate that spring. Yury in medicine, Misha Gordon in philosophy, and Tonya in law. Why medicine for Yury? Good question. He is, after all, a poet. Quote, though he was greatly drawn to art and history, he scarcely hesitated over the choice of his career. He considered that art was no more a vocation than innate cheerfulness or melancholy were professions. End quote. Interesting. I wonder why he thought that way. A few paragraphs later we learn that he's a poet and has aspirations of writing a book of impressions of life. Quote, he believed that originality and vigour alone could give reality to a work of art, and that without them art was utterly useless, superfluous, and a waste of time. End quote. It's tempting to read this as Pasternak's own view. His uncle Kolya, Nikolai, has been a big influence on Yury. Nikolai has had several books published, both in Russian and in other languages. I wonder if that means translations or if he wrote them himself. His books were on philosophy and metaphysics, based on the idea that time and memory can address the challenge of death through Christianity. Memory and immortality are big themes of Doctor Zhivago, and those same ideas push Misha Gordon towards philosophy and theology. Pasternak frames Misha as having extremist tendencies tied to his, quote, racial origin, end quote. A reminder that Misha is Jewish and that this language reflects the period. Yury comes home from university to find that Anna Gromeko has had a terrible health scare. She's really ill. She asks Yury for comfort to tell her about his views on death and resurrection. He explains what consciousness means to him. Quote, You and others are yourself, your soul. This is what you are. This is what your consciousness has breathed and lived on and enjoyed throughout your life. Your soul, your immortality, your life in others. And what now? You have always been in others, and you will remain in others. And what does it matter to you if later on it's called your memory? This will be you, the you that enters the future and becomes a part of it. And now, one last point. There is nothing to worry about. There is no death. Death is not our department. End quote. It's really quite something and gets to the heart of the novel. It's what my wife always spoke of whenever I mentioned Doctor Zhivago, the idea that we never die, that we live on in the memory of those who love us. It's got me tearing up, and that's what got to her as well, 30 odd years ago when she studied it. It's the only Russian novel she's ever really enjoyed. This is why. It's a message we can take with us for comfort. Anna's health improves. She reminisces with Yury and Tonya about her childhood in the Urals. Yury and Tonya take delivery of a new suit and dress to wear at the Sventitskys party on the 27th. Anna asks to speak to Yury in private, but he knows what it's about. He's seen the letter. Anna and Uncle Kolya both think that Yury should not have refused his inheritance. Yury explains that there's really nothing to claim but a muddle of debts. There are other claimants, including one Yevgraf, the son of Princess Stolbunova Endritsi. Yevgraf is therefore Yury's younger half-brother, and it's a name to keep in mind for later. Mind it, Yevgraf. Anna tells of a man from the Urals named Bacchus. He was a blacksmith and was hurt in a fight so that his insides collapsed. He fixed himself by fashioning himself a set of iron guts. Keep this in mind. Anna has a coughing fit and makes Yury and Tonya agree to marry if she should die. Quote, "Get married. There now, I've betrothed you," she added, and began to cry. End quote. We're whisked back to 1906. Lara's still at school and is being driven to despair by her, quote, "insanely contradictory," end quote, affair with Komarovsky. It was, quote, "as inexplicable as black magic," end quote. Komarovsky displays the classic manipulative narcissistic behaviour of an abuser. The summer holidays are looming, during which time not even school will give Lara any respite from Komarovsky. She reaches a sudden decision that was to change her life. She asks her friend Nadia Kolagrivova if she knows of any employment opportunities out of town. It turns out that Nadia's parents are looking for a governess for their daughter Lipa. Lara spends 3 years at the Kolagrivovs, safe from Komarovsky. Her brother Rodia comes to see her and tells her that he's gambled away the money that was entrusted to him to buy a present for the head of the academy. He'd gone to Komarovsky, who'd told him that he would help on the condition that Lara return to him. Lara's angry at her brother, but promises him the money in exchange for his revolver. She gets the money not from Komarovsky, but from Kolagrivov. During her time working as a governess for the Kolagrivovs, Lara had managed to finish school and start university. She was to graduate in the spring of 1912. Lara has been sending part of her wages to Pasha Antipov's father at the prison camp in Siberia, as well as paying part of Pasha's rent in a new building on Kamerger Street. Pasha had taken Greek and Latin on Lara's advice. She dreamed that they would marry after his graduation and move to the Urals. In the summer of 1911, Lara goes with the Kolagrivovs to the fictional town of Duplyanka in the Urals. It's her habit to walk from the train station to the dacha by herself, taking in the air of the countryside. Quote, "For a moment she rediscovered the meaning of her life. She was here on earth to make sense of its wild enchantment and to call each thing by its right name, or, if this were not within her power, then, out of love of life, to give birth to heirs who would do it in her place." End quote. Now that her ward has come of age, Lara is effectively superfluous in the Kolagrivov household, yet the family is happy to keep her on as they've become so fond of her. This makes Lara uncomfortable and she feels she ought to run away to relieve them of the financial burden of supporting her. She also feels that she must repay the money they gave her to get her brother out of his predicament. This situation has a negative effect on her disposition and her outlook on life. She attempts to distract herself by taking part in the usual amusements she shares with the Komarovskys: house parties, bathing and rowing, and shooting. It turns out she's rather a good target shooter. These activities, however, do not distract her. She feels wretched. On the return to town, Lara finds herself bickering with Pasha, and her state of mind deteriorates further still. It leads her to a decision. She will leave the Komarovskys and return to Komarovsky for the money that would allow her to live independently. She leaves for Komarovsky's with her brother's revolver hidden in her muff. She intends to shoot Komarovsky if he refuses or humiliates her. Lara arrives at Komarovsky's only to learn that he's gone out to a party at the Sventitskys. She heads off, but as she passes by Pasha's building, she decides to go and unburden herself on Pasha. She calls in and finds Pasha dressing for a party, another example of the many coincidences in the novel. She asks Pasha to light a candle and turn off the lights. This he does, and as the candle burns on the windowsill, it melts the ice on the window, creating a peephole to the outside, or inside. She tells Pasha that she's in trouble and that they ought to marry right away. Pasha agrees. It's what he's always wanted. But the conversation moves on to other things. The candle motif shows up in Pasternak's poem Winter Night and connects Lara to Yury further on in the chapter. And I've included here an image of Pasternak's own handwritten copy of the poem Winter Night, or Zimnyaya Noch. Translating poetry is challenging in different ways. The first verse in my Hayward Harari translation reads, Winter night, snow swept over the earth, swept it from end to end. The candle on the table burned. The candle burned. Like swarms of summer midges drawn to the flame, the snowflakes flocked to the window. And I've included here a screenshot that shows 12 different openings of this poem in English translations, just to illustrate how challenging translating poetry can be. For every decision a literary translator of prose has to make, it increases tenfold when translating poetry. So I'll just read out the opening lines of the 12 different versions. It snowed across the world. It swept around the land. It snowed and snowed throughout the land. Snow, snow the whole world over. All over the world from east to west. Snow, snow all the world over. It snowed throughout the world. And far and near the blizzard raced. Snow, snow the whole world over. Snowed far and wide about the plain. A blizzard blew and reached its crest. Blizzards were blowing everywhere. See what I mean? Yury has an almost specialist knowledge of ophthalmology, quote, almost in keeping with his creative gifts and his interest in the relation between imagery in art and the logical structure of ideas, end quote. Interesting, huh? Yury and Tonya are on their way to the party. Yury's thinking about the essay he's writing and about the article he'd promised Misha Gordon on the symbolist poet Alexander Blok. Pasternak was a huge admirer of Blok. After Anna Gromekos' instruction to Yury and Tonya to marry, they now see each other differently. There's a nascent passion that hadn't been there before. As they drive through Kamerga Street, Yury looks up and sees a candle burning in a window. It fires up his creativity and he feels the beginnings of a poem coming on. It's a nice moment of coincidence, creating a connection between Yury and Lara. Yury and Tonya arrive at the Sventitskys. The party is in full swing. The Sventitskys are delighted to see Yury and Tonya and recruit them to help out with the preparations for dinner and presents. Lara's in the ballroom at the party. Komarovsky doesn't pay her any attention. Another young girl comes into Komarovsky's eye line and he gives her the same look he would give Lara. The young girl blushes and Lara is beside herself with shame. Quote, "A new victim," she almost screamed, end quote. Lara dances with Komarovsky and upon learning his surname, she suddenly recalls that he was the assistant public prosecutor at the Moscow Central Court and had been at the trial of the railway workers involving Tverzin. Is Lara feeling jealous, or is she genuinely feeling empathy toward this young girl? It's 2 a.m. Tonya is dancing and eating tangerines. As she dances past Yury, she presses her handkerchief into his hand. It smells of tangerines and of Tonya. Yury feels something he's never felt before, romantic love. Quote, "This was something new in Yura's life, something he had never felt before, something sharp and piercing that went through his whole being from top to toe." End quote. A shot rings out. Kornakov comes out of the ballroom and tells everyone he's fine, it's just a scratch. Mrs. Kornakova is enraged. Yury then catches a glimpse of Lara. Quote, "Yura was dumbfounded. This girl again, and again in such extraordinary circumstances. How proudly beautiful she was." End quote. Lara is in a faint. Yury checks Kornakov's wound, but it's merely superficial. Yury then receives a message from home. They have to go back at once. They arrive home too late. Anna has died. Yury remembers how he felt when his mother died 10 years ago in 1901. He compares that with how he feels now, after being educated and having studied the classics and scripture. It hits different. Or it lands differently. That was my attempt at using a modern phrase, which I picked up from an Instagram reel when I was watching Ryan Gosling being interviewed in a Gen Z style. I mentioned this to my son yesterday, that I'd used a Gen Z phrase in an essay, and he asked what it was, and I said, "It hits different," and he's like, "Yeah, that's not even a modern phrase anymore, Dad." So my son's 19, just for context. He knows. So it hits different. Quote, "Now he was afraid of nothing, neither of life nor of death. Everything in the world, each thing in it, was named in his dictionary." End quote. I'm seeing here the outlook of a man of science rather than of a poet. Yury has fallen asleep in a corner. He's awakened by Markel's calling him. They're taking out the coffin and they get stuck behind the big ebony wardrobe on the landing. Markel navigates around it and they carry the coffin out to the street. Anna's funeral. She's buried in the same churchyard as Yury's mother. Yury's struck by expansive feelings of beauty and creativity. Quote, "He realised that art has two constant, two unending preoccupations. It is always meditating upon death, and it is always thereby creating life." End quote. He plans to write a poem in Anna's memory. The narrator tells us of the details Yury will include in his poem. Everyday details of that day. Street incidents on the way back from the funeral, and the washing hanging in the place where he had wept as a child, and the blizzard had raged. It sounds like Pasternak himself, who wrote for the love of language. In the BBC Omnibus programme on Pasternak, Angela Livingston, reader in Russian literature at the University of Essex, states,
"In a sense, Pasternak wrote about just anything that came to hand. He wrote about everything around him. He wrote about what he could see from his window, what he could see below his house, what he felt, what he was feeling at the time. He wrote about the landscape. He wrote about the mountains. He wrote about the room he was in. He wrote about simply anything. It was writing as such, writing for the joy of writing, writing for the love of language."
And I've got a link there to the radio broadcast, Omnibus, Boris Pasternak, BBC World Service, 29th of January 1990. And I recommend listening to it, it's really interesting. That's where I learned of Pasternak's love of the poet Alexander Blok as well. I have read a bit of Blok's poetry, but I'm more knowledgeable about the poetry of Anna Akhmatova, who was also around at the same time, and whom Pasternak knew personally and corresponded with. Also with Marina Tsvetaeva, another is poets of the Silver Age, or the Symbolists. Anna Akhmatova was the poet I studied most at university when I was a student of Russian language and literature back in the mid-90s. And I've started recording some of Anna Akhmatova's poems, which have been going out in my YouTube channel. I've kind of stalled on it for a bit, but I would like to get back to it because I find it rewarding in a very big way. So what I've been doing is reading out the poems in Russian, which means I've got to try and find other readings of the poems, because in reading poetry you really have to get the stress and the words right. It's important for the rhythm, for the rhyming. So I don't always know where the stresses fall in the Russian. So yeah, that's, I think, what made me stall in the project. But yeah, give us a bump, give us a poke, and make us get back to it, because it's something I want to do. Personally, I find it extremely rewarding, and I think it's useful to have this kind of thing out there on the internet as well. So I've got the full works of Anna Akhmatova in Russian and in English translation, translated by Judith Hemschemeyer, and yeah, it's fascinating. But Bloch was, I suppose he was like the father of the Symbolists, and in a historical fiction novel that I really, really enjoyed. I've read it 3 times, in fact. It's called The Revolution of Marina M. by Janet Fitch, and Bloch features in that. It follows the story of a young poet called Marina who grows up in St. Petersburg, and it starts out before the 1917 revolutions and goes right through and then into the Soviet era. So we follow this young poet who also is a big fan of Bloch, and she actually meets Anna Akhmatova in the Stray Dog Cafe in St. Petersburg, which is a lovely moment, lovely, lovely moment. And it was through reading that novel and the follow-up, The Chimes of the Cathedral, I think it was called. It was through reading those, Lost Chimes of a Cathedral, that's what it is, that my interest in Akhmatova was rekindled. You know, I hadn't read Akhmatova since second year at uni, so that would make it 94, 95. And all of a sudden there I was buying books and reading her poetry for the internet. So it was kind of fascinating how that came about. But yeah, as historical fiction goes, I highly recommend those 2 books. They really bring that period of history to life, and particularly if you love literature and poetry, it's got that added element as well, which is just endlessly fascinating to me. I'm sure I'll read them again at some point. I'll also point out that the narrator of the Audible versions of those books, Yelena Shmulyanson, clearly a native Russian speaker, because she gets all of the pronunciations absolutely spot on. For instance, the river in St. Petersburg, it's not the Neva, it's the Neva. So things like that, these things are important to me, and yeah, I'm just bringing that up as something that I really enjoyed as well. So there we go, that's where we are with Doctor Zhivago. We're going into chapter 4 next week, so I hope you'll join me. I hope you're enjoying this read along as much as I am. I'm very glad I read it in March, so that I'm aware of the whole story as I'm going through it again, chapter by chapter, to share it with you. And I hope it's helpful. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you for chapter 4. Пока!